January sleet lashed against the car windows like frozen whips, each pellet hammering into the rusted '98 Honda Civic parked in the dark corner of a Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m. 6 months of running to this forgotten corner of Chicago, and Scarlett still flinched at every sound, every shadow passing across the fog of her breath on the glass. Her trembling fingers pulled the torn sweater down to cover the iron-shaped burn scar on her shoulder, the gift Marcus had branded into her flesh the night she dared to look at another man. Just temporary, she whispered to her reflection in the frost-covered window, those words becoming the only mantra keeping her from collapse. The bone-cutting cold of sleeping in a car was temporary. The hunger twisting her stomach after 3 days on a single loaf of bread was temporary. The nightmares of that pitch-black basement where he had locked her for 3 days without food or water, temporary. The constant looking over her shoulder, temporary. At least that was what she told herself to keep from losing her mind. She tilted the rearview mirror and examined her appearance under the sickly yellow streetlight. Brown eyes that once held warmth now sunken with exhaustion. Cheekbones jutting sharp as blades from the 15 kilos that had abandoned her body in 6 months. Pale skin stretched over her frame like it might tear. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, a ghost of who she used to be before Marcus had systematically destroyed every piece of her across 5 years of hell, before he forced her to kill the 2 children growing inside her, before he extinguished every last spark of hope. Her phone buzzed and her heart seized before she remembered he could not find her here. She had burned every bridge, changed her number, erased all social media, left even her real name behind in Detroit, along with her battered body the night she crawled through the back door, while he lay passed out drunk with the knife still wet with her blood in his hand. The message was from Nina, the only person she dared trust in this strange city. Got you an interview at Inferno, 7 tonight. Do not be late. I will lend you clothes. Inferno, the most exclusive nightclub in Chicago where Nina worked. Tips from one night there equaled a whole week of her dishwashing and waitressing. Enough to rent a room with 4 walls and a roof. Enough to sleep without fear of freezing to death. Enough to run somewhere Marcus would never find her, somewhere she could rise again from the ashes of herself. As you read this and feel each quiet pulse of the story, as your heart tightens when you think of Scarlett and everything she has endured, take a moment to press the subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you will not miss any part that comes next, and let a single like or a simple share carry Scarlett's story to even more hearts. And we would love to know where you are listening from at this very moment. So please leave a comment with the name of your city or your country below, letting us see how far Scarlett's journey has traveled across this wide world. And now, let us continue the story. Scarlett tried to steal a few more hours of sleep, but the cold that cut straight through the fabric of her thin, frayed blanket would not allow it, and she lay curled tightly beneath it, her teeth chattering so hard she feared they might crack. The phone screen showed 4:45 in the morning when she finally surrendered the fight for rest and started the old car whose engine groaned like a dying creature before reluctantly waking. And she drove through the empty, ice-covered streets toward the Little Greek restaurant on South Side, where she washed dishes from 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. The owner never asked for papers or for her past, only paid cash at the end of each day, and that was all Scarlett needed, even if it meant 9 hours standing before an enormous sink with her hands submerged in hot chemical water until her skin split and bled while she scrubbed each pot, each pan, each mountain of dirty dishes without a single complaint, reminding herself every time the ache spread from her back down her legs that this was still better than what Marcus had done to her, that the cracks on her hands were nothing compared to the burn scar on her shoulder, that exhaustion was nothing compared to the terror of waking beside him every morning. At 2 o'clock she received $80 and drove to Nina's apartment in Pilsen, where Nina opened the door with dark eyes sweeping over her from head to toe before pulling her inside without a word, into a small but warm place, scented with candles and fresh coffee, a place that felt like heaven to Scarlett. And Nina pushed her into the bathroom, turned on the hot water, and said, "You have 45 minutes. Shower and I'll make you look human." Standing beneath hot water for the first time in more than a month felt like 1,000 needles piercing her frozen skin, and she cried without sound, her tears disappearing into the stream running down the drain, and when she stepped out she caught sight of her own body in the mirror, and had to grip the sink to keep from collapsing because her ribs rose like piano keys beneath pale skin. The iron-shaped burn scar on her shoulder was still red after 6 months. Her abdomen bore the stretch marks of the 2 lives she had never been allowed to keep, and faint scars marked her wrists from the times she had been desperate enough to try to escape this world, and she turned away, unable to bear the reflection. Nina had laid out a simple black dress and heels on the bed, saying, "My clothes are a bit loose on you, but you'll have to deal with it," while pushing her into a chair to apply makeup, reminding her that Inferno was no joke, that the owner, Dominic Castellano, was rumored to be Mafia, but she didn't care, because he paid the highest wages in Chicago and never let anyone touch his employees. And Scarlett sat still, while Nina covered the dark circles beneath her eyes and added a little color to her pale lips, telling her to answer honestly, not to lie or pretend to be someone else, saying that Dominic Castellano hated pretense more than anything, and that she should never look him in the eyes too long because it was like staring into the center of a storm. Scarlett swallowed hard, her heart fluttering wildly, knowing she had no idea what she was walking into, but having no other choice, and that by 7 tonight her life might change, or she might continue dying slowly in that rusted car in the Chicago winter. At 6:45 she stood before Inferno, feeling as if she had stepped into another world, the building rising over the old neighborhood like a modern fortress with a facade of black glass and gleaming steel catching the light, without flashy signs or neon, only a single word, Inferno, carved in gold-plated steel above the entrance, glowing like quiet embers. A line stretched nearly 100 meters down the sidewalk, everyone dressed as though they had stepped out of a fashion magazine, in tight designer dresses, perfectly tailored suits, shimmering heels and luxury watches, and Scarlett shrank into Nina's borrowed thin coat, suddenly painfully aware of how out of place she was among the wealthy and powerful. The black dress she wore was pretty, but not in the same league as what surrounded her, and she clenched the small bag holding her fragile resume, reminding herself to breathe as she approached the main door where the guard, a man as large as a bear with tattooed arms and eyes cold as ice, stopped her instantly, growling back of the line without even looking at her. When she whispered that she was here for an interview and that Nina Santos had sent her, the name gave him pause, and after studying her he spoke a few words in Italian into his radio, nodded, and directed her toward the alley beside the building. The back door, go straight in, someone's waiting. Scarlett slipped past the waiting crowd, feeling their curious, dismissive gazes burning into her back as she entered the narrow, dim alley lit by a single bulb above a heavy steel door, and when she knocked it opened immediately to reveal a long hallway bathed in red light with electronic music pulsing from somewhere deep inside. The air thick with expensive whiskey, Cuban cigars, and luxury perfume, and the door slammed shut behind her like the jaws of some giant beast. She walked down the hallway with her heart pounding until a figure stepped from the shadows and blocked her path. A man younger than she expected, perhaps 32, with close-cropped black hair, sharp brown eyes, a charcoal suit hugging a solid frame, and a posture that belonged to someone accustomed to violence. And he said Scarlett Morgan in a low, flat voice that startled her because she had not given him her name. "I'm Dante," he said, never breaking eye contact, the boss's brother. "And before you meet him I have questions." She nodded silently while he fired them off like bullets, asking why she had come to Chicago, how she knew Nina, what she had done before, whether she owed anyone money, whether anyone was looking for her, each question hitting her without giving her time to think. And she answered as evenly as she could, saying she needed work, that she had met Nina by chance at a cafe, that she had waitressed in Detroit, that she owed no one. And she lied when she said no one was searching for her while praying Dante would not see the falsehood in her eyes. He stared at her long enough for cold sweat to trickle down her spine before turning and saying, "Follow me," without letting her know whether he believed her, and together they walked through a maze of corridors, where the red brick walls shifted into polished dark wood, and the crimson glow softened into warm gold chandeliers, until they reached a massive carved oak door. Dante knocked twice, opened it, and pushed her inside, murmuring, "Do not lie to my brother," just before she crossed the threshold, because he always knows when someone lies, and the door closed behind her as she stood alone in the vast dark room with her heart racing, while she felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her from somewhere within the shadows. The room was vast, almost like a small private hall, with a high vaulted ceiling supported by dark wooden beams and crystal chandeliers suspended above her like constellations frozen in midair, and behind it all stretched a wall of glass that revealed Chicago at night, with its towers glittering like scattered jewels across a field of black velvet. Yet none of that held Scarlett's attention the way the solitary figure did, the one sitting behind a massive oak desk at the center of the room, his face hidden in shadow, as the light from the window haloed him in darkness, so that she saw only the sharp outline of a perfect black suit, wide shoulders, and the posture of a man accustomed to ruling from a throne. Then he rose, and Scarlett had to lift her chin to follow the movement, for he was at least 6'2", a man clearly in his mid-30s with a maturity that overwhelmed the room, his body carved like something out of granite, and each step he took echoed against the wooden floor with the heavy inevitability of a countdown. When he stepped into the light, Scarlett nearly forgot how to breathe, because Dominic Castellano was not handsome in any conventional way. His face was all hard planes and precise angles, a jaw that looked carved by an axe, and a faint scar running from his temple to his cheekbone, like the last remaining whisper of a violent past. His ink-dark hair slicked back to reveal a broad forehead and thick brows, but it was his eyes that rooted her to the spot. Gray, not in the ordinary sense, but gray like the sky before a storm. Gray like tempered steel. Gray like the ashes after a fire has burned itself out, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel stripped of every layer of armor she had ever built. "Scarlett Morgan," he said, his voice a distant rumble of thunder, each syllable delivered with the precision of a man used to commanding, and she tried to respond, but her throat was dry as dust until she finally managed to whisper, "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview," her voice trembling more than she wished. Dominic did not answer. He only tilted his head slightly as if studying a difficult piece of art before moving toward her, slow and deliberate like a predator closing in, and Scarlett stepped back on instinct before she could stop herself and saw his storm, gray eyes narrow just a fraction, signaling she had revealed something she had not meant to show. "Sit," Dominic said, pointing to the leather chair before his desk, and she sat upright, hands clutching her bag on her lap while he did not return to his chair, but instead leaned against the edge of the desk directly before her, his long legs crossed, his eyes never leaving her, the distance between them close enough for her to catch the scent of his cologne. Sandalwood mixed with something sharper, metallic, dangerous. "What college did you graduate from?" he asked in that flat, unreadable tone, and she answered honestly that she had not graduated, that she had dropped out in her second year because of family circumstances, offering nothing more and receiving no further questions from him. "Bartending experience," he continued, and she replied 1 year at a small bar in Detroit before she stopped, unsure how to continue, until he prompted before what, and she said before I had to leave, her voice shrinking with the words. Silence followed, heavy and unmoving, until Dominic suddenly reached toward her face, and Scarlett reacted in the way she had tried so many years to suppress, jerking back, raising her hands to shield herself, her whole body curling into the defensive posture of someone far too familiar with being struck. And when she realized what she had done, she lowered her hands slowly, heat flooding her cheeks as she whispered, "I'm sorry," staring at the floor, not knowing why. Dominic said nothing, but she saw his jaw tighten, saw the storm gather in his gray eyes, and then, in a voice unexpectedly gentle, he said, "Hand me the file on the desk." Scarlett stood and reached for the folder, the motion pulling her sleeve up just enough to expose the yellowing bruises on her wrist, the marks shaped like fingers that had once squeezed hard enough to nearly snap bone, and she tugged the sleeve down in panic, but it was too late. The gray eyes had already seen. Something shifted in Dominic Castellano's expression then. Not pity, for she knew pity too well. Not morbid curiosity, for she had endured that too, but something darker, something dangerous, something that glowed like banked embers beneath cooled ash. "You're hired," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Starting tomorrow night, double pay." Scarlett opened her mouth to speak, but Dominic had already turned toward the window, his posture making it clear the interview was over, and he added, "Dante will show you out." "And Scarlett," he called just as she touched the doorknob, and she turned back to see his silhouette framed against the night sky. "Whatever you're running from," Dominic said, his voice a promise or a threat she could not yet decipher, "here you are safe." The door closed behind her, and Scarlett stood in the empty hallway with her heart racing no longer from fear but from something she did not yet dare name. On her first night working at Inferno, Scarlett felt as if she had stepped into a parallel universe, where everything was so lavish it bordered on unreal, and Nina led her into the staff changing room, where the lockers were made of polished walnut, and every bartender had a custom-tailored uniform waiting for them. Scarlett's uniform had already been prepared, a black silk shirt and fitted trousers that hugged her body as though someone had taken her measurements with unnerving precision, and she did not ask how they knew because she had learned there were questions better left unasked. Nina began teaching her from the ground up, how to hold a shaker, how to pour liquor by sight rather than tools, how to memorize hundreds of cocktails from the classics to the modern inventions, and Scarlett learned as if her life depended on it, because in a way it did, scribbling notes in her small notebook, practicing until her hands ached, asking the same questions so many times that Nina finally told her to relax because no one was firing her after 1 week. But it was not only the job that tightened Scarlett's nerves, it was the things she began to notice about Inferno itself, For this club was nothing like any place she had ever worked, and the customers were not ordinary people grabbing a drink after work, but middle-aged men in suits worth more than her entire car, murmuring in Italian or Russian, their eyes constantly sweeping the room, as if assessing threats. The upstairs VIP floor was always guarded by at least 4 armed men, and whenever the door opened, Scarlett glimpsed meetings inside that felt more like negotiations than celebrations. And no one explained what Inferno truly was, but she was not stupid. She had grown up in Detroit. She knew the smell of dirty money and hidden power. Nina said only once, in a tone colder than Scarlett had ever heard, "You didn't see anything? You didn't hear anything? You don't know anything? Understand?" And Scarlett understood, because living with Marcus had taught her exactly when to keep her mouth shut and look away. What unsettled her most was not the dangerous men who came through Inferno, but the constant sensation of being watched. A prickle at the back of her neck, no matter how busy she was shaking drinks or wiping the bar, and every time she looked up she found Dominic Castellano standing on the VIP balcony, those storm-gray eyes fixed on the exact spot where she stood. He never smiled, never nodded, never made any gesture acknowledging her at all, only watched with the gaze of a hunter studying its prey, or perhaps a guardian protecting something fragile, and she did not know what those looks meant and was far too afraid to find out. The first week passed in exhaustion and tension, but also in something close to peace, because for the first time in 6 months, Scarlett had steady income, and the tips alone tripled what she had made, combining 2 dishwashing and waitressing jobs. She began eating 2 meals a day instead of 1, began standing up without feeling dizzy, but she still slept in her car every night after her shift, too afraid to spend money on a room, when she did not know how long this job would last, too used to living, ready to flee at any moment. She parked behind Inferno because at least there were security cameras and patrolling guards, safer than the dark Walmart lot, and she did not know that each night after she curled beneath her thin blanket and drifted into uneasy sleep, a man stood at the highest window of Inferno, looking down at her rusted car. She did not know that those gray eyes kept watch over her until dawn broke. She did not know that her life had begun to shift the moment she stepped through that office door, and that Dominic Castellano had made a decision, one he himself did not yet fully understand. On the 7th night after Scarlett began working at Inferno, Dominic sat alone in his office at 3 a.m, the pale blue glow of his laptop screen casting cold light across the sharp angles of his face. The club had closed hours ago. The staff had all gone home, yet he remained as he always did, reviewing security footage under the justification of routine checks, though his storm-gray eyes did not sweep the hallways or entry points as usual, but fixed instead on a single place, the rear parking lot, where a rusted Honda Civic sat tucked into the darkest corner. He zoomed in, and something inside his chest tightened with a pain he could not name. Scarlett was curled up in the back seat, wrapped in a thin, worn blanket, her breath fogging the windows in soft clouds despite the 10 degrees below zero cold outside. She was sleeping in her car. She had been sleeping in her car all week, right beneath his nose, and he had not known. Dominic shot to his feet, his jaw clenching so hard it sent a spike of pain through his skull, his hands curling into fists that trembled with a fury he did not fully understand. He wanted to storm downstairs, rip open that damned car door, lift her out and carry her somewhere warm, but he knew that would terrify her, send her running, and the thought of her disappearing from his life, just as he had found her, made something deep inside him recoil in pure dread. Instead, he grabbed his phone and called Dante. "I need everything on Scarlett Morgan," he said, his voice cold as ice but burning beneath. "Everything from the day she was born until the moment she walked into Chicago. And I need it now." 2 days later, Dante entered the office with a thick folder and a shadowed expression, placing the stack of papers on the desk and stepping back as though wanting nothing more to do with what was inside. Dominic opened the file and began to read. Scarlett Morgan, 27 years old, born in Detroit, orphaned at 16 when her parents died in a car accident. Her legal guardian and uncle had stolen every cent of her inheritance. At 22, she began dating Marcus Webb, a successful businessman with deep ties to the local police, and that was when the descent into hell began. Dominic turned the page to the hospital records, and it felt as if acid were being poured into his veins. 12 hospital admissions in 5 years. The first, broken ribs, patient claimed she fell down the stairs. The second, head trauma, patient claimed she hit a door. The third-degree burn on her shoulder, patient claimed she spilled an iron. The fourth, miscarriage, patient claimed an accident. The fifth, another miscarriage. The list went on like a demon's indictment, each line a lie meant to hide a crime, each injury proof of systematic cruelty. Dominic stared at the photographs attached to the medical file. Scarlett's face swollen and bruised, her body mottled with dark patches, her brown eyes staring into the camera with the emptiness of someone who had already surrendered hope. The pen in his hand snapped cleanly in two, black ink bleeding across his fingers like spilled blood. "Marcus Webb," he growled, tasting the name like poison. Dante nodded. "We've had people on him. He's hired a private investigator. He's been looking for her for 6 months. He won't stop." Dominic moved to the window, staring down into the parking lot where the battered Honda still rested. "Protect her 24/7, he ordered, his voice allowing no argument. "I want to know where she goes, what she eats, who she speaks to. If anyone unfamiliar gets close to her, I want to know immediately." "And Marcus Webb," Dante asked, "continue surveillance?" Dominic turned, the gray of his eyes gone cold as frozen hell. "Follow every step he takes. If he sets foot in Chicago, I want to know before he even breathes the city's air." Dante slipped out of the room, leaving Dominic alone with the file and the wildfire of rage coursing through him. He looked at Scarlett's photograph once more, that bruised face, those dead eyes, and he made himself a silent vow. No one would ever hurt her again. And if Marcus Webb dared to appear, Dominic would personally teach him what hell truly was. The next night, at the end of her shift, while Scarlett was wiping down the bar and getting ready to leave, Dante appeared beside her like a shadow. "The boss wants to see you," he said curtly, turning away before she could answer. Scarlett's heart dropped like a stone into a deep well. What had she done wrong? She had tried her best, memorized everything Nina taught her, never complained even when her legs throbbed after 8 hours on her feet. Had someone discovered she was sleeping in her car and reported it to the boss? She followed Dante on trembling legs, already calculating where she would go if she lost this job. The office door opened and she stepped inside, trying to look calm though her insides twisted tight. Dominic stood by the window just as he had the first time she met him, his tall frame outlined against the Chicago night. He turned when he heard the door close, his storm-gray eyes finding her immediately. "Sit," he said, his voice no longer as cold as during the interview, carrying a tone she couldn't decipher. Scarlett sat in the familiar chair, her back straight as a reed, bracing for the verdict. But instead of firing her, Dominic said something she never expected. "The club has an empty apartment on the upper floor," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Fully furnished, 24/7 security, 1 elevator ride from the bar. You can move in tonight if you want." Scarlett's mouth parted in shock, unable to form a response. He knew. Somehow he knew she was sleeping in her car. Shame swelled up in her throat, tangled with the old instinctive fear that no kindness came without a hidden price. "I can't accept that," she whispered, her voice small but firm. "I don't want to owe anyone anything, and I can't afford a place like that." Dominic tilted his head, his gray eyes narrowing as if her words intrigued him. "I'm not offering it for rent," he said. "The apartment belongs to the club and it's unused. You staying there doesn't cost me anything, and you don't owe anyone anything. Consider it an employee benefit." Scarlett shook her head, her hands tightening on the hem of her shirt. She had heard promises like this before. Marcus had once given her an apartment, a car, clothes, everything she could ever want, and she had learned that nothing was free. Every gift had been a chain, every kindness a trap, every convenience a new way to own her. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "But I can't. I've learned there's no such thing as something for nothing, and I don't want to be indebted to anyone, ever again." Silence stretched between them. Scarlett braced for anger, for pressure, for the subtle threats Marcus used whenever she refused anything. But Dominic only looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, something deep and complicated moving beneath the storm-colored surface of his eyes. "All right," he said at last, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "I respect your decision. But the offer stands if you change your mind." Scarlett rose, her legs unsteady with relief. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded and turned toward the door. Her fingers had just touched the handle when Dominic's voice sounded behind her. "At least park under the east awning. It's warmer and the cameras there are better." She froze for a second, realizing he not only knew she slept in her car but also exactly where she parked. Something strange moved in her chest then. Not fear as she had expected, but something warmer, something that felt dangerously close to safety. She didn't turn around, only whispered thank you before stepping out. When the door closed, Dominic lifted his phone. "Double her security," he ordered Dante. "And make sure the area where she parks is patrolled every 30 minutes. She may not want help, but that doesn't mean she won't have protection." 3 weeks had passed since the night Scarlett refused Dominic's offer of the apartment. She still slept in her car every night, now in the east-covered lot just as he had suggested, though she would never admit she'd listened to him. Work at Inferno had grown familiar, her tips now enough for 3 meals a day, enough that she had even begun saving a little for a future she wasn't sure she believed in. But everything changed on the night the historic snowstorm hit Chicago. The weather reports had warned for a week about the White Beast, the worst blizzard in 50 years. With forecasts of temperatures dropping to -30 degrees and wind gusts reaching 50 miles per hour. Dominic ordered Inferno closed early, something that had never happened in the 10 years the club had existed, sending every employee home with full pay and strict instructions not to go outside until the storm passed. Scarlett drove away with the rest of the fleeing crowd, but she did not return to the east lot as usual. Instead, she headed toward the familiar Walmart parking lot in the suburbs, where she felt safer among other workers' cars. She didn't want anyone from Inferno to see her during the storm, didn't want their pity, didn't want anyone reporting her situation to Dominic. The greatest mistake of her life. The storm hit faster and harder than any forecast predicted. An hour after she parked, snow had swallowed everything in sight. Wind howled like a pack of starving wolves outside the windows. Scarlett tried to start the heater, but the old Honda engine groaned once, twice, then died for good. She tried again, and again, 10 times. The car refused to come back to life in the brutal cold. "It's fine," she told herself, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her. "Just wait until morning." But the cold did not wait. It seeped through every crack in the rusted frame, crawling into her bones like a ghost with icy fingers. The temperature inside the car dropped -5, -10, -15. Scarlett began to shiver uncontrollably, her breath forming frozen clouds right before her face. She curled into a ball, hugging her knees, but the cold pierced every cell. Her head spun, her eyelids grew heavy, as if weighted with lead. She knew the danger. She knew she must not fall asleep, but she was exhausted, worn down by weeks of fear and hunger and relentless hours. As darkness crept in, the last image flickering through her fading consciousness was of storm-gray eyes watching her from the VIP balcony, and she wondered if anyone would remember her if she died here tonight. At his penthouse, Dominic could not sleep. He paced before the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the storm tear across the city like a white beast devouring everything in its path. Instinct gnawed at him, sharp and insistent, and Dominic Castellano never ignored his instincts. He opened his laptop and accessed the GPS system Dante had secretly installed in Scarlett's car the week before. His heart stopped. She was not at Inferno. She was at a Walmart parking lot 15 kilometers away, the GPS signal unmoving for 3 hours. In a -25-degree blizzard, Dominic didn't call Dante. He didn't call anyone. He grabbed the keys to his Range Rover and tore through the garage like a man possessed. Driving in a blizzard was suicide, roads blocked, visibility near zero, but Dominic did not care. He plowed through half-meter drifts, crossed empty intersections, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel, gray eyes straining to see through the avalanche of snow. 20 minutes later, he found the Honda Civic buried under a thick blanket of ice in the corner of the lot. He slammed the brakes, jumped out, and ran through the storm, snow slicing at his face like blades. He pounded on the window. No response. He wiped the frost with his sleeve and saw her lying motionless in the back seat, lips blue, skin white as death. Dominic didn't think. He drove his elbow through the glass, ignoring the shards slicing into his arm. He reached in, unlocked the door, and pulled her out. Her body was frozen, weightless, in a way that terrified him. He couldn't find her pulse at first, and something inside his chest cracked open in raw panic, then faint, barely there, but there. Relief hit him so hard it nearly brought him to his knees. He carried her to the Range Rover, blasted the heat on maximum, then did the only thing he could think of to keep her alive. He took off his coat, wrapped her in it, pulled her tightly into his arms, and used his body to warm hers. He drove back to the penthouse with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping her as though letting go would kill her, whispering words he hadn't realized were coming out of his mouth. "Hold on," he murmured into her frozen hair, his voice breaking. "Don't you dare give up now. Don't you dare leave me alone." Scarlett heard nothing, but somewhere deep inside the darkness swallowing her, she felt warmth steady, fierce, and alive, and she clung to it as if it were the last fragile thread tying her to the world. Warm light seeped through her eyelids and pulled Scarlett out of the deepest sleep she had fallen into in months. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the golden sunlight pouring through an enormous wall of glass. A high ceiling stretched above her with dark wooden beams and glittering crystal chandeliers, and silk sheets cradled her body with the softness of clouds. She was lying on the largest bed she had ever seen, in a room more luxurious than any five-star hotel she had ever admired in a magazine. For one hazy moment between sleep and waking, Scarlett thought she had died, and this was heaven. Then memory crashed over her like a wave, the cold that sliced into her bones, the darkness swallowing her whole, and a pair of warm arms pulling her back from the jaws of death. She tried to sit up, but her weak body refused, her head spinning and her limbs still numb. "I'm here," a deep voice said from the corner of the room. Scarlett turned her head and saw Dominic sitting in an armchair beside the bed, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, his shirt wrinkled, his sleeves rolled up to reveal poorly bandaged cuts from shattered glass. The gray eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, yet they watched her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. He sat here all night, she realized, keeping watch over her as if she were something precious that needed guarding. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice rough from a dry throat. Dominic didn't answer. He simply stood and poured a glass of water from the pitcher on the bedside table. He lifted her head with a gentleness that startled her and held the glass to her lips. "Drink," he said, his voice tired but soft. "The doctor said you had severe hypothermia. You need at least a week of rest. You're staying here until you're fully recovered." Scarlett wanted to protest, to say she couldn't stay here, couldn't owe him any more than she already did, but her body betrayed her. She was too weak to do anything except close her eyes and slip back into sleep. When she woke again, Dominic was gone. In his place, a woman in her 60s was setting a tray of food on the table beside the bed. Her silver hair was tied in a neat bun, her face lined with age, but her dark eyes shone warm and bright, and her smile felt like spring sunlight. Scarlett stared at her, unsure who she was. "You're awake," the woman said in a thick but gentle Italian accent. "I'm Rosa, Dominic's mother. He told me you were sick, so I brought chicken soup. Family recipe, cures everything." She placed the tray across Scarlett's lap and sat on the edge of the bed without waiting for permission. The scent of chicken broth, herbs, and simmered vegetables filled the room. The scent of home, of care, of things Scarlett hadn't known since her parents died. "Eat," Rosa said softly, lifting a spoon to Scarlett's lips as if she were a child. "You're too thin, skin and bones like a stray cat. I don't know who treated you so badly, but you're safe here now. No one will hurt you again." Those simple words, spoken with a mother's tenderness, broke through the walls Scarlett had spent years building. She tried to hold herself together, but the tears came uncontrollably, spilling down her cheeks and falling into the steaming bowl. She cried without sound, her shoulders shaking, her body curling inward as if trying to make itself small enough to disappear. How long had it been since anyone told her she was safe? How long since someone cared for her without wanting anything in return? Rosa said nothing. She gently set the soup aside and gathered Scarlett into her arms, holding her like the daughter she never had, stroking her hair and whispering Italian comforts. Scarlett could not understand, but felt in her bones. And Scarlett cried for 5 years of hell, for the 2 children she never got to keep, for the innocent 22-year-old girl who had died under Marcus Webb's hands, for everything she had lost and everything she feared to hope for again. Outside the half-open door, Dominic stood in the hallway's shadows, watching his mother hold the trembling woman in her arms, and in his chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time began, slowly, quietly, to melt. For 3 days, Scarlett lived in the penthouse as if inside a dream she feared would dissolve the moment she opened her eyes. Rosa visited daily, bringing steaming Italian dishes and stories from her youth in Sicily. Dominic was gone most of the day for work, but every night he returned, settling into the armchair beside her bed until she drifted to sleep. They did not speak much. It was simply his presence, steady and silent near her, yet Scarlett found herself waiting for it, needing it in a way she didn't dare examine. Her strength returned little by little, color warming her cheeks, her legs steady beneath her again. While Dominic worked, she explored the vast penthouse. It occupied the entire top floor of a Gold Coast high-rise, offering a sweeping 360-degree view of Chicago. The decor was minimalist but impossibly expensive, from Italian leather sofas to abstract paintings she suspected were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet what struck her most was the utter absence of anything personal. No photographs, no mementos, nothing to indicate who lived here. The penthouse was beautiful, but cold, like a museum display. On the 3rd night, Scarlett woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of voices drifting from the living room. She stayed still for a moment, listening. Dominic's voice, but not the one he used with her. This voice was icy, sharp, weighted with the authority of a man accustomed to issuing life-or-death commands. Curiosity overcame caution, and she slipped out of bed, bare feet silent on the polished floor. She paused at the corner of the hallway where she could see without being seen. Her heart stilled. Dominic stood in the center of the room, phone pressed to his ear, surrounded by 5 men in black suits she recognized as Inferno's security. He was speaking rapid Italian, clipped and urgent, threading in words she didn't know, but whose threat she could feel like a blade in the air. Then he stopped, listening to whoever spoke on the other end. When he answered, his voice dropped to something so cold it sent a shiver through her even from across the room. "Fallo sparire," he said, each syllable precise as steel. "And make sure no one finds him." She did not know Italian, but she had watched enough crime films to understand what that command meant. Make him disappear. Ensure the body is never found. She froze, unable to breathe. The man who had pulled her from death's grip, who had let his mother cradle her like a daughter, whose gray eyes softened every time he looked at her, had just ordered someone's execution in front of her. She must have made some sound, because Dominic turned his head sharply, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers in the shadows. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise, regret, pain, she could not tell. It vanished almost immediately. He said a few words to his men and they left at once, leaving the vast room silent except for the pounding of her heart. Scarlett wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But her legs would not move. She stood trembling in her thin nightgown as Dominic walked toward her with slow, careful steps, as though afraid she might shatter if he came too close too quickly. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking but refusing to back down. "Who are you really?" Dominic stopped a few steps from her, his gray eyes fixed on hers, unwavering. He did not try to lie. He did not try to soften the truth. "I am Dominic Castellano," he said, his tone calm and flat, head of the Castellano family, one of the 5 most powerful syndicates in Chicago's underworld. Inferno is our legal front, but most of our income comes from work you don't want to know about. The floor beneath her seemed to tilt. She had suspected things weren't normal at Inferno, but hearing him confirm it so plainly still struck her like a blow. "You're Mafia," she whispered, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "You kill people." "When necessary," Dominic replied, without shame, without hesitation. "I don't pretend to be a good man, Scarlett. I've done things you would be horrified to know. But I have rules. The Castellano family does not traffic drugs, does not traffic people, does not harm women or children. We have our own honor, whether the outside world believes that exists or not." He took a single step forward. Scarlett instinctively stepped back. A flash of pain crossed his face, but he didn't stop. "My father built this empire with his bare hands when he came from Sicily at 18, Dominic continued, his voice taking on a distant sadness. "He was assassinated when I was 28, right in front of me, by a rival family trying to take what was ours. I had no choice but to step in, to protect my family, to protect the people loyal to us. This is not the life I wanted, but it is the life I have." Scarlett didn't know what to say. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her mind spinning with fear, confusion, disbelief. But beneath it all, beneath the storm inside her, lay a truth she could not deny. This man, whatever else he was, had saved her life, had given her a job when no one else would, had let his mother care for her as if she were their own. "I will never hurt you," Dominic said then, his voice softening into something so gentle it tightened her throat. "Whether you believe me or not, whether you stay after tonight or walk away, I promise you this. You are safe with me, Scarlett. You will always be safe with me." She looked into his gray eyes, eyes that moments ago had ordered a man's disappearance, and saw something wild and desperate flickering there. And in that terrifying, impossible moment, she realized something else. She believed him. She believed the man who killed without hesitation would never harm her, and that truth frightened her more than anything else ever had. Scarlett could not sleep that night. She lay in the vast bed staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with everything she had learned about Dominic Castellano. He was Mafia, a killer, the head of a criminal empire. But he was also the man who had plunged into a deadly blizzard to save her, the man who had sat beside her bed every night until she fell asleep, the man whose storm-gray eyes softened every time they landed on her, as though she were something fragile and precious. In the end, she gave up trying to sleep and stepped out onto the balcony, letting the icy night wind wash over the heat rising restlessly beneath her skin. Chicago sprawled beneath her like a tapestry studded with diamonds. millions of lights glittering across the darkness. She didn't hear him come out, but she felt him an unmistakable presence behind her. "You'll catch a cold?" Dominic said, his deep voice rolling through the quiet. She didn't turn, only gripped the railing more tightly. "I couldn't sleep," she answered. He stepped up beside her, close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him, but he didn't touch her. They stood in silence for a long time, sharing the night sky like two strangers tethered by something neither could name. "May I ask you something?" Dominic said at last, his voice unexpectedly soft. Scarlett nodded without looking at him. "The scar on your shoulder," he said, each word slow, careful. "Who did that to you?" Scarlett felt as though someone had struck her square in the chest. Her hand rose instinctively to her shoulder, to the iron-shaped scar hidden beneath the thin fabric of her nightgown. She wanted to lie. She wanted to tell him it was an accident, as she had told doctors, police officers, and every person who had dared to ask over the past 5 years. But when she turned and met Dominic's gray eyes waiting, steady, without judgment, she realized she didn't want to lie to him. "Marcus," she whispered, speaking his name aloud for the first time since she fled Detroit. "My ex-boyfriend. He did it because I looked at a waiter too long. He said I needed to be marked so I wouldn't forget who I belonged to." Dominic's jaw clenched, the gray in his eyes darkening like a sky thickening before a violent storm. But he didn't interrupt. He didn't rage or threaten or swear vengeance. He simply stood there, listening, and his silence unlocked something in her. The words came rushing out. She told him about Marcus, how he had charmed her when she was a lonely, grieving 22-year-old girl, how he slowly isolated her, controlled every dollar she spent, every step she took, every person she spoke to, how he hit her for the first time, and how she convinced herself it was just a mistake, how violence became routine, and she adapted to fear the way a fish adapts to water. She told him about the 2 children she had carried, the 2 tiny lives she had loved the instant she knew they existed, and how Marcus had forced her to get rid of them both because she was unworthy of being a mother, because he didn't want to share her with anyone, not even his own children. She told him about the dark basement, where he locked her for 3 days with no food or water because she talked back once. She told him about the last night, when he beat her until she passed out, and she woke to find a knife stained with her blood lying next to his hand. She told him how she crawled out the back door, stole his keys, and drove 12 hours, taking endless detours on back roads to make sure she wasn't followed, until she reached Chicago. When she finished, she realized tears were streaming down her face. She hadn't even felt them fall. She stood trembling, hollowed out, weightless from the years she had just dragged into the light. Dominic said nothing. Slowly, painfully slowly, giving her every second to pull away, he reached up and gently brushed aside the fabric of her nightgown, revealing the scar on her shoulder. His fingertips touched the uneven skin with a tenderness so unexpected it stole her breath. "No one will ever do this to you again," he said, his voice a quiet vow in the cold night air. "No one will touch you without your permission. No one will hurt you, not ever again." Scarlett looked up and met the storm, gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that bordered on desperate. And for the first time in 5 years, she did not flinch when a man touched her. She stood still and let his fingers trace invisible shapes across the scar, let the warmth from his hand seep into her chilled skin. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Minutes, hours, time dissolving on the balcony above Chicago, where 2 broken souls had somehow found each other in the dark. And when Dominic finally let his hand fall away, her eyes were dry, and her heart felt lighter than it had in years. 1 week after the night on the balcony, Scarlett made the decision to move out of the penthouse. Her strength had returned, enough for work, enough to face reality without leaning on the warmth and safety Dominic's home had wrapped around her. She couldn't stay there forever, couldn't allow herself to depend on the kindness of one man no matter who he was. Dominic didn't argue when she said she wanted to move into the club apartment he had once offered. He only nodded, something unreadable flickering through his gray eyes, then quietly instructed his men to prepare the place for her that very day. The apartment was much smaller than the penthouse, but still more luxurious than anything she had ever lived in. 1 bedroom, a cozy living room, and windows overlooking a lively Chicago street. That first night alone, Scarlett expected she would sleep better than she had in months. She was wrong. The nightmare came like a thief slipping through a broken lock. In her dream, she was back in the Detroit apartment, Marcus pinning her to the floor, his hand crushing her throat, his eyes wild as he screamed, "You belong to me. You will always belong to me," while she clawed at his arm, desperate for air. She felt her life slipping from her body inch by inch, darkness narrowing her vision, and she knew this time he would kill her. She awoke to the echo of her own scream, several seconds passing before she realized the sound had come from her own throat. She sat bolt upright, soaked in cold sweat, her heart hammering as if it meant to burst through her ribs. Her hands trembled violently as she curled around her knees, whispering to herself, "It's only a dream. It's only a dream. He's not here. You're safe. You're safe." But her body refused to believe it. A rapid knock pounded on the door, followed by Dominic's voice. "Scarlett, are you all right? Open the door." She didn't know how he knew, maybe security cameras, maybe some unseen system, but she didn't care. She only knew she needed someone. Needed the presence of a real human being to remind her that she was no longer trapped in that living nightmare. She stumbled to the door and opened it. Dominic stood there in simple sleep clothes, his black hair tousled as if he had sprung out of bed, his storm-gray eyes sweeping over her in a single glance, taking in the sweat, the shaking, the terror still imprinted on her features. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't demand explanations. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and wrapped his arms around her. Scarlett stiffened for a heartbeat, old instinct, old fear, but her body betrayed her. She collapsed against him, fists gripping his shirt as though afraid he might vanish if she let go, and she cried. She cried for the nightmare, for the 5 years of hell, for the terror that never truly left her even after escaping. Dominic held her, one arm around her waist, the other gently stroking her hair, murmuring words she couldn't understand but felt sink into her like warmth seeping into frozen skin. He didn't say, "You're fine" or "Don't be afraid," phrases hollow from overuse. He simply stayed, solid as a mountain beneath her hands, a place to anchor herself until the storm inside her eased. When Scarlett finally lifted her head, eyes swollen and cheeks streaked with tears, Dominic was looking at her with an expression she didn't dare try to name. His hand rose slowly, carefully, like he was approaching a frightened wild creature, and he wiped her tears away with his thumb. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice hoarse and soft as breath. Scarlett froze. No one had ever asked her that. Marcus never asked. He took what he wanted, whether she agreed or not. But Dominic Castellano, the most feared man in Chicago, stood before her asking permission, as if her answer mattered, as if her desire carried weight. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and when his lips met hers, gentle, tentative, a butterfly landing on a trembling petal, she broke into tears again. But this time, not from fear, not from pain. This time she cried because, for the first time in her life, someone treated her like she mattered, like she was something to be cherished. 2 months slipped by like a dream. Scarlett feared she would wake from it any moment. After that first kiss, everything between her and Dominic shifted in ways she had never imagined possible. He never rushed her, never pushed, never demanded anything. He simply stayed steady, patient, allowing her to decide the pace of whatever was growing between them. And slowly, bit by bit, Scarlett began to open her heart to the man she once believed she could never trust. She moved back into the penthouse a month after that kiss, realizing she no longer wanted to sleep alone in the small apartment, no longer wanted to wake up without him beside her. Life in the penthouse was nothing like the picture she once had of living with a mafia boss. Dominic woke early each morning to make her breakfast, perfect fried eggs and coffee exactly the way she liked it. He remembered she hated onions and loved her toast extra crisp. Remembered she drank green tea at night and couldn't stand heavy perfume. Small things Marcus had never noticed. Dominic remembered as if his entire world depended on them. In the evenings, when work allowed, they curled on the sofa watching old movies, her body tucked into his, her head resting on his shoulder. Sometimes they spoke softly about nothing at all. Sometimes he told her about his childhood in Chicago, about his father and the lessons of honor he had passed down, about the dreams Dominic once had before life forced him into the throne he now carried. And she listened, realizing that beneath the icy exterior of the Mafia kingpin was a lonely man no one had ever truly seen. Rosa visited weekly, always bringing warm Italian dishes and a smile so maternal it made Scarlett's throat tighten. She took Scarlett's hands and told her she had never seen her son smile so much. "I've never seen his eyes soften the way they did when he looked at her." Even Dante, who had once watched her with suspicion and distrust, began to change. He started greeting her with a nod, sometimes even offering a rare smile, teasing her that she had somehow tamed the lone wolf of the Castellano family. Scarlett's body changed too, shaped by months of safety and nourishment. She gained weight, soft curves returning to a frame once wasted by fear. Her skin glowed warmer, her brown eyes regained a spark she thought was lost forever. When she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw a ghost of herself. She saw a woman slowly rising from the ashes, But happiness was never whole for someone life had once shattered. Even in Dominic's nearly perfect world, the shadows of her past lingered like a cold breath at her ear. She still flinched at sudden noises, her heart racing long before she understood it was only a closing door or a fallen object. She still checked the locks 3 times before bed, though the penthouse had the best security in the city. And deep inside, she still could not silence the fear that this happiness was temporary, that it would be ripped away, that Marcus would find her, that somehow she was unworthy of the life she was being given. She didn't know her fear was not unfounded. She didn't know that in Detroit, Marcus Webb was staring at a secretly taken photograph of her stepping out of Inferno wrapped in Dominic Castellano's arms, and that the smile on his lips was colder than winter ice. The fateful night began like any other evening at Inferno. Scarlett stood behind the bar, her hands moving with effortless precision as she mixed complex cocktails she could now make with her eyes closed. She no longer worked because she needed the money Dominic had told her. She never had to work another day in her life, but she loved the feeling of being useful, of building something with her own 2 hands. Nina was beside her, the 2 of them trading small jokes during the rush, and for a moment life felt so perfect Scarlett almost forgot she had ever lived in hell. Almost until she looked up and saw him. Marcus Webb stood in the center of the crowd, wearing the familiar expensive gray suit, his brown hair slicked back neatly, the charming smile she had once been foolish enough to fall in love with before discovering the monster behind it. He stared straight at her, his brown eyes glinting with the same madness she had seen hundreds of times before he hurt her. Time froze. The music vanished. The crowd vanished. The entire world shrank until there was only her and him, suspended in a nightmare she had prayed would never return. The tray of glasses slipped from Scarlett's hands and shattered across the floor, but she didn't hear it. She saw only Marcus stepping toward her, each confident stride a declaration that he owned this place, owned her. Her body betrayed her before her mind could react. She began to shake, not a gentle tremor but a violent, uncontrollable trembling, as if someone had grabbed the strings of her bones and rattled them from the inside. Her legs turned to stone. She could not run, could not hide, could not move. Nina noticed something was wrong and turned toward her, but Scarlett couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stand frozen like a rabbit caught in headlights. Marcus stopped at the bar, the smile on his lips stretching wide, the smile of a shark scenting blood. "I found you, darling," he said, his voice sweet and venomous, poisoned honey dripping from every syllable. "You thought you could run from me? You thought you could leave me and be happy with someone else?" Scarlett wanted to scream, to call security, to do anything to stop the nightmare unfolding before her, but 5 years of being broken had stamped out every instinct of defense. She stood there, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, her mouth open but no sound coming out. "You belong to me," Marcus continued, reaching across the bar to grab her. "You will always belong to me, and I'm taking you home, whether you want to or not." His hand never reached her. A figure appeared out of nowhere, gripping Marcus's wrist and twisting it back with a sickening crack. Dominic stood there, towering over Marcus by nearly a head, his gray eyes blazing with a fury Scarlett had never seen before. This was not the Dominic who held her gently each night, not the Dominic who cooked her breakfast, not the Dominic who whispered comfort into her hair. This was Dominic Castellano, Mafia kingpin, cold-blooded killer, and he was looking at Marcus as though Marcus were already a corpse. "You dare walk into my territory," Dominic said, his voice so cold the very air seemed to freeze. "You dare lay a hand on what's mine." Marcus tried to pull away, but Dominic's grip was iron, unyielding. "Do you know who I am?" Marcus shouted, his confidence wavering. "I'm Marcus Webb. I have connections with Detroit PD. I'll have you rotting in prison for the rest of your life if you touch me." Dominic laughed, a short, humorless sound, cold as winter ice. "I am Dominic Castellano," he said, each word slow and precise like he was pronouncing a death sentence. "And you are in Chicago, not Detroit. Here, the police work for me, the laws bend for me, and your life ended the moment you stepped into this city to threaten my woman." He signaled with a flick of his hand, and 4 guards materialized, seizing Marcus and dragging him away. But before they reached the back door, Dominic stepped close, leaning in to whisper something only Marcus could hear. Whatever he said drained every drop of color from Marcus's face. His eyes widened with real terror Scarlett had never seen in him before. He didn't shout anymore, didn't threaten or posture, but as the guards hauled him toward the exit, he turned his head and gave Scarlett one last smile, the smile that froze her blood. "She'll always belong to me," he screamed as the door swung shut. "No matter what you do, she will always be mine." Then he disappeared, but his words lingered in the air like a curse dragged up from hell. Dominic turned immediately, striding towards Scarlett and pulling her into his arms right there in front of the packed club. She collapsed against him, shaking violently, sobbing soundlessly into his chest. "You're safe," he whispered into her hair, his voice soft again, utterly at odds with the man who had just threatened another man's life. "I won't let him touch you. Not ever again." But in the deepest part of her heart, Scarlett knew this wasn't the end. Marcus Webb was not a man who accepted defeat, and the smile he gave her before disappearing told her everything she needed to know. He would come back. The only questions were when and how. After the night Marcus appeared, Scarlett collapsed entirely, shutting herself inside the bedroom of the penthouse, locking the door, refusing to open it no matter how many times Dominic called her name, no matter how Rosa pleaded, no matter how Nina wept outside the frame. She curled on the bed like a frightened child, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes fixed on a hollow point in the air, as the memories of 5 years in hell rushed back in a tidal wave she had no strength to stop. Every blow, every insult, every night she cried without a sound, because even breathing too loudly had become dangerous. She had thought she had run far enough, thought she had become safe, thought she had been allowed to begin again, but Marcus had found her, and that meant she would never truly be free, because wherever she ran he would follow. However long she hid, he would eventually appear, and the last smile he gave her haunted her each time she closed her eyes, while his words echoed inside her head like a death knell that refused to fade. On the first day, she ate nothing and drank nothing, lying motionless like a body emptied of its soul, the hunger clawing at her stomach, but she did not care because physical pain was kinder than what lived inside her heart. Dominic sat outside her door the entire night, his breaths rising and falling on the other side of the wood, his voice slipping through the crack as he spoke to her even though she never answered, telling her about his day, the weather, the food his mother had cooked, anything he could think of so she would know he had not left her. "You do not have to open the door," he said, his voice tired yet patient. "You do not have to speak a single word. You only need to know I am here, and I am not going anywhere." By the second day, Scarlett had begun to dehydrate, her mind spinning, her lips cracking with dryness, knowing she was destroying herself but unable to summon the strength to care, thinking perhaps this was the simplest way. Perhaps if she disappeared, Marcus would have nothing left to hunt. Perhaps Dominic would not have to bear the burden of her existence any longer. But Dominic's voice continued beyond the door, steady as a heartbeat, reminding her that someone was waiting for her to step out of the darkness. On the second night, she awoke to the murmur of voices from the living room, recognizing Dominic, recognizing Dante, recognizing several men she did not know, and though her body trembled with weakness, her curiosity pulled her upright as she staggered toward the door and opened it just a sliver. From that narrow view, she saw Dominic seated at the head of the table with about 8 men beside him, all in dark suits, all carrying the weight of grave decisions on their faces, and she understood at once that this was a family council. "He has returned to Detroit," Dante reported with a voice as cold as iron. "But he is not giving up. He is contacting lawyers and the police there, and it appears he may attempt to claim guardianship over her based on mental health grounds." Dominic did not speak, but even from the doorway she saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. "Is there any other option?" an older man asked, and she guessed this was Vincent, the advisor Dante had mentioned, reminding them that Webb had connections with the Federal Bureau and that acting too recklessly could cause trouble for the family. "I do not care," Dominic said, his voice slicing through the room like steel through glass. "He threatened what is mine. He terrified her to the point she locked herself away for 2 days without food or water. I want him gone for good." Dante nodded and murmured this was the best solution, that a man like Marcus would never stop, that they could handle it cleanly so no one found a body and no one ever knew what had happened. Scarlett stood frozen behind the doorframe, her heart pounding so violently she thought it would burst apart, listening to them speak about killing Marcus, as if it were an ordinary business decision, as if a human life were merely a figure on a ledger. She knew Marcus was a monster, knew he deserved consequences for what he had done to her, but hearing Dominic order a death because of her made her stomach twist with fear, because she did not want anyone dying on her behalf, did not want to become the reason violence spread again. She pushed the door open and stepped into the room, forcing every man at the table to turn toward her, and she knew she looked dreadful with tangled hair, swollen eyes, a body shaking from hunger and dehydration, but she did not care. "Do not," she said, her voice ragged from 2 days of silence. "I do not want you killing anyone because of me." Dominic rose instantly and crossed the room toward her with worry etched across his face. insisting she needed food and rest and that they would discuss this later. But she stepped back as he reached for her, insisting they talk now. Insisting he could not decide on killing a man without asking for her voice. Insisting that this was her life and her battle, and that she had a right to speak. It was the first time she had ever truly defied Dominic, the first time she had stood upright and demanded to be heard, and when she looked into his eyes she saw surprise, perhaps even respect, but she also saw an immovable resolve, and she understood that this fight between them had only just begun. 1 week after the argument, the air inside the penthouse felt as tense as a violin string stretched to the point of snapping. For although Dominic had agreed to postpone his plan to deal with Marcus at Scarlett's request, she knew it was only a temporary concession, and he increased the security around her, refused to let her leave the penthouse alone, monitored every call and message she received, insisting it was for her safety, while Scarlett felt as though she were suffocating inside a gilded cage, loving Dominic yet needing room to breathe, needing to feel like her own person rather than someone's possession. Dominic's birthday was coming the following week, and Scarlett wanted to give him something truly special, having seen a limited edition Patek Philippe watch in a store on Michigan Avenue that he had once mentioned in passing, and she had saved every tip from Inferno for months to buy it, wanting no one to ruin the surprise, wanting no shadow of him knowing. That morning, while Dominic was meeting with his Kappa regime, she slipped out through the back stairwell she had discovered was not covered by cameras, knowing she was taking a risk, knowing he would be furious, but needing only 2 hours to buy the watch and return before anyone noticed. So she called a taxi instead of using her own car, pulled her hood tight, and believed foolishly that she had planned well enough. She had been wrong. Marcus had been following her for a week, waiting for exactly this moment, and the instant Scarlett stepped out of the watch store, with the small box in hand, a black van screeched to a stop beside her, and 2 men grabbed her before she could scream, pressing a chemical-soaked cloth over her mouth and nose, until the world vanished into darkness. When she woke, she did not know how long she had been unconscious, her skull pounding as if struck by a hammer, her throat scraped raw, her eyes burning from a single harsh bulb overhead, and when she tried to move, she felt the metal chair biting into her wrists and ankles where she was tied, her mouth sealed with tape, trapped inside a derelict warehouse with stained concrete walls and a floor as cold as ice, and not a single window to reveal whether it was day or night. Footsteps echoed behind her, and her heart seemed to stop when Marcus stepped into view, looking different from the last time she had seen him at Inferno, his eyes red from lack of sleep, his jaw shadowed with unshaved stubble, and the smile on his face stripped of all false charm until only madness remained. "Do you remember me, darling?" he asked, his voice sickeningly sweet as he approached her with a slow, deliberate rhythm, telling her he had missed her, that he had thought of her every day since she abandoned him. And then he ripped the tape from her mouth, making her cry out from the sting, leaving her no hope of shouting for help because no one could possibly hear her here. She wanted to beg, but 5 years with Marcus had taught her begging only excited him. So she bit down on her lip and summoned the last fragile fragment of her courage and said, "Dominic will find me," her trembling voice refusing to break. "He will kill you for this." Marcus laughed, a sound that rang through the warehouse like the caw of a raven, mocking the idea of a Mafia king frightening him, insisting she belonged to him, insisting she always would, and that if he could not have her, no one ever would. He drew a knife from his coat, the blade gleaming beneath the bulb, and Scarlett recognized it instantly as the same knife that had cut into her flesh the night she escaped, realizing he had kept it for 6 months as some twisted keepsake. What followed was the worst nightmare Scarlett had ever lived, something beyond anything Marcus had inflicted during the previous 5 years, for he was not angry now, and not in a rage, but calm and methodical, almost artistic, carving shallow lines across her arms just deep enough to draw blood but never deep enough to kill her, striking her face and her stomach and every wounded place he remembered. And through it all he talked, rambling about his love for her, about her betrayal, about how she had ruined his life by leaving him, telling her she had forced him to do this, wiping her blood on her clothes as though it were some tender gesture, insisting none of the pain would have been necessary if she had stayed where she belonged, insisting it was all her fault. Scarlett no longer had strength to cry or plead, floating somewhere between consciousness and oblivion, as her body went numb with pain, and her mind drifted far away from him to a place he could not reach, thinking of Dominic, thinking of the soft gray eyes that always gentled when they looked at her, thinking of their first kiss as light as a butterfly's wing, thinking of the future she would never have, the children she would never bear, the life that was ending on a filthy warehouse floor at the hands of the man she had once believed she loved. "He will kill you tonight," Marcus murmured as he laid the blade against her throat. "And then he will kill himself, And we will be together forever, darling. Nothing will ever separate us again." Scarlett closed her eyes and accepted her fate. And the last image in her mind was Dominic's face, and the last word on her lips was his name. Dominic knew something was terribly wrong the moment he returned to the penthouse and did not see Scarlett. Calling her name as he searched every room, checking the balcony and the bathroom, finding only the hollow stillness of an empty space that felt like a tomb, and when he called the security team and learned they had not seen her leave the building, the blood in his veins turned to ice as he checked the cameras and saw her slipping out through the back stairwell, the image of her stepping into a taxi piercing his chest like a blade, because he had promised to protect her, had sworn no one would ever touch her again, and he had failed. Dante answered his call within 30 seconds and activated the entire Castellano network, sending more than 200 men across Chicago in a search the city had never witnessed, sweeping through every street, every alley, every abandoned structure, while Dominic reached out even to rival families and enemies from past wars, and they all agreed to help because no one in the underworld wanted to face the fury of Dominic Castellano. Information poured in from every direction, traffic cameras capturing the black van that had taken Scarlett on Michigan Avenue, witnesses seeing it heading south, undercover contacts in the police reporting that Marcus Webb had rented an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district on the south side. And Dominic did not wait for confirmation or reinforcements, but drove like a man possessed through the city, with only Dante and 4 guards following, every second ticking by as another second in which Scarlett could die, and he could not imagine existing in a world where she was gone. They found the warehouse after nightfall, a slab of gray concrete amid a wasteland of shuttered factories with the black van parked outside, and Dominic did not wait for orders or strategies or caution as he kicked open the steel door and charged inside with his gun drawn, only to freeze when he saw what lay before him as the weapon slipped from his fingers and clattered across the floor. Scarlett sat tied to a metal chair in the center of the warehouse, her body drenched in blood and wounds, her head hanging limp, while Marcus stood behind her with a knife pressed to her throat, smiling with the madness of a man already lost as he greeted Dominic with a crow-like laugh, telling him he was too late and had arrived only in time to watch her die. Dominic did not hear Marcus's words, did not hear Dante shouting behind him, did not hear anything except the roar of blood in his ears as he saw the woman he loved bleeding and fading beneath the hands of the man who had tormented her for 5 years. And something inside him, something he had chained for so long beneath the cold armor of a Mafia kingpin, erupted like a volcano. He moved so fast Marcus had no time to react, knocking the knife from his hand with one arm and seizing him by the throat with the other, before hurling him against the wall with enough force to rattle the building. And Marcus tried to fight, tried to punch and kick, but he was only a man, while Dominic had become a beast unleashed from every restraint. Dominic hit him without mercy, each blow carrying the weight of the pain Scarlett had endured for 5 years, each kick an oath of vengeance for every scar on her skin, for the 2 children she was forced to lose, for the basement where he had locked her in the dark, and blood spattered the wall, the floor, and the expensive suit Dominic wore. But he did not stop, not even when Marcus became nothing more than a broken mass on the concrete. Only when Marcus lay at his feet did Dominic kneel and wrap his hands around the man's throat, staring into Marcus's widening eyes as pure terror bloomed there for the first time. And he squeezed until Marcus's eyes rolled back, until the rattling breath shattered, until life seeped out of his body inch by inch. And Dominic did not look away because he wanted Marcus to know exactly who sent him to hell. When Marcus was finally dead, Dominic rose and rushed to Scarlett, cutting the ropes with the very knife Marcus had used on her, gathering her into his arms with a gentleness that broke him open because she felt weightless, cold, fragile as glass, and he felt the faint throb of her heartbeat beneath his blood-stained hands, and held her tightly as though he could transfer his life into hers, calling her name with a voice splintered like shattered crystal, begging her to open her eyes, begging her not to leave him. And then the impossible happened. For Dominic Castellano, the coldest man in Chicago, the Mafia king who had not shed a tear since the day his father died, began to cry, tears falling down, a face streaked with the blood of his enemy, tears landing on the tangled hair of the woman he loved as he wept because he had almost lost her, wept because he had failed to keep her safe, wept because for the first time in his life he understood he could not survive without someone. He lifted her into his arms and carried her out of the warehouse, leaving Marcus's corpse and the darkness behind him. And though Dante had already called an ambulance and arranged everything as he always did, Dominic refused to let anyone touch Scarlett, holding her himself in the car all the way to the hospital, whispering into her hair the promises he would keep even at the cost of his life, that no one would ever hurt her again, not ever, Not as long as he breathed. Scarlett woke in the hospital 2 days after the abduction, her body wrapped in bandages and her mind drifting in and out of a fog shaped by painkillers. And the first thing she saw when her eyes opened was Dominic sitting beside her bed, with his hand clamped tightly around hers. His eyes bruised from lack of sleep, his jaw shadowed because he had not bothered to shave, for he had not left her side for even a moment, as the nurses later told her, refusing to go home, refusing to eat properly, simply sitting there watching her as though terrified she would vanish the instant he blinked. Rosa and Nina came in shifts, bringing flowers and homemade food and tears of gratitude that she was alive, telling her about the frantic search that had swept through the entire city, about how Dominic had mobilized every resource he possessed to find her, though no one told her what had happened to Marcus, and whenever she asked, they fell silent or changed the subject, while Dominic only said in a voice cold as steel that he will never trouble you again. She healed slowly in the weeks that followed, the wounds closing into fresh scars beside the old ones, the broken bones knitting themselves beneath plaster. But her mind was another story entirely, for she woke in the night screaming and soaked in sweat, clawing at the air as though Marcus were still tightening his hands around her throat, terrified of enclosed rooms, terrified of the dark, terrified of sudden sounds that reminded her of the warehouse and the hours she had spent inside a living nightmare. Dominic hired the best psychologist in the city and paid whatever it cost to help her heal, yet he still refused to tell her the truth about Marcus. A month after she was discharged, Scarlett could walk normally and had begun trying to adjust to life again, still living in the penthouse with Dominic and still allowing him to care for her. Yet she sensed a difference in the way he moved around her, a suffocating vigilance in the way he protected her, never letting her leave alone, checking her phone, monitoring every call and every message, insisting it was to keep her safe, insisting no one would ever harm her again. But Scarlett felt herself drowning because she had escaped one cage only to step inside another, even if this new cage was built from love rather than cruelty. That afternoon, Dante came to the penthouse to give Dominic an update, and Scarlett was reading in the living room when she heard her name and Marcus's name spoken in the office, and she had no intention of eavesdropping but could not keep herself from listening. The police department in Detroit has closed the case on Marcus Webb's disappearance, Dante said in a tone as calm as if he were reporting the weather. They found no body, no witnesses, no evidence. Officially, he has vanished without a trace. And Dominic answered, "Good. Make sure everything stays clean. I do not want Scarlett to know anything." And Dante added, "She does not need to know you strangled him to death. She has already endured enough without that image in her mind." Scarlett stood, the book slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor with a sound that made both men look up, and she stood in the doorway of the office with her face drained of color, and her eyes wide with horror and betrayal as she whispered, "I heard everything. You killed Marcus and you hid it from me." Dominic stepped toward her, his hand extended in supplication, begging her to let him explain, but she backed away, her voice rising as she said she did not need explanations. She needed honesty from the beginning, and reminded him of the promise he had made never to lie to her, never to hide anything from her, while Dominic insisted he had done it to protect her, that Marcus deserved to die, that she did not need to shoulder such a burden. "You decided for me," she cried, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. "You decided what I needed to know and not know, as if I were a child incapable of handling my own life. Do you understand how that makes me feel?" And Dominic tried again to say he only wanted to protect her, but she shouted back that she did not need his protection in that way. She needed his respect, needed him to trust her, needed him to treat her like an equal partner, rather than a fragile object to be kept behind glass. Dominic stood there with his gray eyes filled with anguish, as he murmured that he had done everything for her safety and happiness, and Scarlett let out a bitter laugh that tasted like spoiled honey, as she said, "Do you know something, Dominic? That is exactly what Marcus told me too. Every time he hit me, every time he locked me up, every time he controlled my every breath, he told me he did it because he loved me and wanted to protect me." She could see Dominic flinch as though struck, the comparison wounding him more deeply than any weapon, yet she did not retract it, because she had been silent too long and had endured too much, and could no longer live inside a relationship in which she had no voice. "I need time," she said softly, almost eerily calm now. "I need space to think, to understand what I truly want." And Dominic stepped forward with pleading eyes, begging her not to go, promising he would change, that he would do anything she asked as long as she did not leave him. But Scarlett had already made her choice. She went into the bedroom, packed the bare essentials into a small suitcase, and walked to the door without looking back, because she knew that if she looked into Dominic's eyes even once, she would not have the strength to go, and she needed to leave, not because she did not love him, but because she loved him so deeply she was in danger of losing herself again. And she had survived that once with Marcus and had almost died, and she could not allow it to happen again, even with a man who loved her in truth. 3 months passed like a long dream in which Scarlett could no longer tell whether she was awake or asleep, and she rented a small apartment in Lincoln Park, where sunlight spilled through the windows every morning, and birdsong replaced the sound of honking cars, a place that was far from luxurious, with only 1 bedroom, a tiny living room, and a kitchen barely large enough for 1 person. But it belonged to her alone, paid for with her own savings from the days she had worked at Inferno, and for the first time in her life she occupied a space that was not Marcus's, not Dominic's, not anyone's but hers. She found a new job at a small Italian restaurant in the neighborhood, not glamorous like Inferno, but enough to cover her expenses and give her the independence she longed for. And more importantly, she began therapy twice a week with Dr. Sarah Chen, a middle-aged woman with warm eyes and a gentle voice who guided her inside a quiet room with a soft sofa and dim lighting, where Scarlett slowly learned to face her demons instead of fleeing them. She spoke about Marcus, about the 5 years of hell, about the babies she had been forced to lose, about the scar on her shoulder and the invisible scars carved into her spirit. And she also spoke about Dominic, about the love she still felt despite her efforts to deny it, about the fear of being controlled again even if the man who might control her loved her with sincerity. Dr. Chen did not judge her, did not offer empty reassurances, only listened and helped Scarlett find answers to questions she had never dared ask herself. Scarlett missed Dominic every day, missed the gray eyes that looked at her as though she were the entire world, missed the way he held her at night, missed the rare sound of his laughter when she said something funny. Yet she did not reach out because she needed time and space to understand what she truly wanted and needed to learn to love herself before loving anyone else. Nina remained in touch, calling now and then to check on her and telling her about Inferno, about how much Rosa missed her, about how much Dominic had changed, about how he no longer barked orders but asked for opinions, how he had even apologized to Dante for being too controlling, and she added with disbelief that she did not know what Scarlett had done to him, but she had turned the coldest mafia boss in Chicago into someone entirely different. Dominic spent those 3 months living in a private hell, losing something for the first time in his life that he could not reclaim with power or money. And though he could have found Scarlett easily, though he could have appeared at her door at any moment, he did not, because doing so would have proven her right, would have proven that he was still the man who controlled rather than trusted. Rosa was the one who pulled him back from the edge, sitting across from him in the cold penthouse and saying things no one else dared, telling him that real love was not protection at any cost but respect for the other person's autonomy, telling him that Scarlett was not an object to be kept but a human being who needed to be heard, telling him that if he truly loved her, he had to loosen his grip and trust her strength. Dominic listened, truly listened for the first time in his life, and he began to change slowly, not in grand gestures but in small, steady shifts like ice melting beneath sunlight, learning to ask Dante for opinions rather than dictate orders, learning to share decisions with the Kappa regime instead of ruling alone, learning to say sorry when he was wrong and thank you when he was helped. Quietly, he did something no one else knew. He hired lawyers to investigate Scarlett's uncle, the man who had stolen her inheritance after her parents died, using law and evidence instead of violence or threats to reclaim everything that belonged to her. On the anniversary of her parents' passing, Scarlett traveled alone to a cemetery outside Detroit, placing a bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the 2 graves she had not dared to visit for 6 years, because she feared Marcus would follow her, and she knelt on the damp grass and spoke to them about her life, about what she had endured, about the man she loved but had left behind. She was crying when she sensed someone behind her, and when she turned, her heart seemed to stop, because Dominic stood there holding a bouquet of white roses, his gray eyes filled with all the longing he had held back for 3 months. And he said softly that he had not come to ask her to return but to tell her he had learned about her parents and about what her uncle had done, and that he had legally reclaimed her inheritance without violence or threats, and everything awaited her in a bank account under her name. Scarlett rose to her feet with tears sliding down her face, but no longer tears of pain, and Dominic continued with a trembling voice that he had come to apologize and to show her he had changed. And the decision was hers, always hers. She looked into his gray eyes and saw something she had never seen before, not control, not possession, but pure respect and patient waiting and a willingness to accept whatever choice she made. And in that moment, standing in the cemetery with her parents as witnesses, she knew she was ready for the next step. They did not return to each other immediately after that meeting, but chose to begin again like two strangers starting over, slow and careful, as though learning to walk after an accident. And Dominic asked if she would have dinner with him, and she said yes, with her heart pounding inside her chest. Their first date was at a small restaurant in Little Italy. Not the expensive, elegant places Dominic was accustomed to, but a cozy family-owned spot with checkered tablecloths and candles melted onto wine bottles, and they spoke for 4 hours about things they had never shared, about dreams and fears and the future they hoped to build. And Dominic did not control the conversation or make decisions for her, but listened and asked her opinion about everything from dessert to weekend plans. Their dates continued. Movies, walks in the park, museum visits, ordinary activities they had never done together when they lived under the same roof, and Scarlett realized she was falling in love with Dominic in a new way, not through rescue or gratitude, but through mutual choice and equality. 6 months after their reunion, Scarlett moved back into the penthouse, but the apartment had been transformed. The cold gray walls repainted a warm cream, the black leather sofa replaced with a soft teal fabric, one she had once mentioned liking, and on the walls hung family photographs Dominic had tracked down, pictures of her parents on their wedding day, pictures of her as a child, images he had collected quietly during their time apart. She stood in the living room and cried, not out of sorrow, but because for the first time she felt truly at home. 1 year after their reconciliation, Dominic proposed on the penthouse rooftop where they had stood together the night she told him about her scar, and there were no helicopters dropping flowers, no orchestras like in Mafia films, only 2 people beneath a sky full of stars with Chicago glittering below, and he knelt on one knee holding a diamond ring Rosa had given him, the ring belonging to his grandmother from Sicily, and spoke the simplest words, telling her he was not perfect, that he was a killer, a mafia boss, a man with too many shadows in his past, that he could not promise never to disappoint her or never to make mistakes, but he could promise always to respect her, always to listen, always to see her as an equal partner rather than someone who needed to be shielded, and he asked if she would be his wife. Scarlett looked at the man kneeling before her, the man who had saved her life, had killed the man who tortured her, had broken her heart, and then learned how to mend it, and she saw the scar on his jaw, a mark of his violent past, and she thought of the scar on her shoulder, a relic of her own hell, and she understood that 2 broken people had found each other in the dark, and instead of destroying one another had chosen to heal together. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling between laughter and tears. "I want to be your wife." And Dominic stood and slid the ring onto her finger and held her as though afraid this was only a dream. As they stood on the rooftop with 2 once shattered hearts learning to beat together, Scarlett knew this was not an ending but a beginning. The beginning of a healing journey. They would walk side by side, not because they were perfect, but because they chose to love each other with all their scars and shadows. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories do not belong to perfect people who find each other, but to broken souls who learn to heal together, not in spite of their wounds but because of them. And the story of Scarlett and Dominic comes to a close, yet the lesson it leaves behind lingers, reminding us that no matter how deep the abyss we fall into, we always have a chance to rise again, that true love is not control or possession, but respect and trust, that healing is a long journey we do not have to travel alone, and that sometimes the most beautiful things emerge from the darkest places, just as a lotus blooms from the mud. Thank you for staying with us through this entire story, and if your heart has been touched, if you see yourself or someone you love in Scarlett's journey, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next heartfelt story, and a like and a share from you will help these meaningful stories reach many more hearts. We would love to hear from you, to know how this story made you feel, whether it reminded you of anything from your real life, whether you have witnessed or survived toxic relationships and found your way out, and please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every line and cherish every story you entrust to us. Wishing all of you watching this video good health, joy in your days, and a peaceful spirit always. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.